Port Gibson, the Grand Gulf Military State Park, and the ghost town, Rodney, Mississippi, is a nice, fun half-day excursion while staying in Natchez. This is Daryl
and Aaron
on Travel with D&E. We like to make memories, and Natchez, Mississippi is a great place to do that. We spent a long weekend staying at the Choctaw Hall Bed and Breakfast in Natchez, and wanted to spend a half day exploring other areas around Natchez. We hopped on Highway 61 and headed north to Port Gibson. We then drove west to the Grand Gulf Military State Park. Next, we drove by Alcorn State, as there is an old road to Rodney from Alcorn State, but decided to take an alternative path that was paved. This was a great short trip and highly recommended to you if staying in the Natchez or nearby areas.
Port Gibson is a city in Claiborne County, Mississippi, bordered on the west by the Mississippi River. The first European settlers in Port Gibson were French colonists. In 1729, cotton plantations were developed after the 1830s, and many of the residents at that time were enslaved working on the cotton plantations. The town saw action in the Civil War. In the 20th century, Port Gibson was home to the Rabbit's Foot Company that played a substantial role in the Mississippi Blues development. The Isabella Bed and Breakfast has a storied history, with the original first floor construction occurring in 1834. The second floor was added on in 1880. Further improvements were provided, and the B&B is operated by the existing owners Kelly and Isabel. The last major employer of Port Gibson was Oil Works, a cottonseed mill closed in 2002. Because of industrial agriculture and lack of other jobs, the city and surrounding rural counties have suffered from reduced population and long-term poverty. The peak of population in the city was in 1950.
After Port Gibson, we headed over to the Grand Gulf Military Park. After the Battle of Port Gibson in 1863, the victorious Ulysses S. Grant made Grand Gulf his base of operations. And now a Mississippi landmark listed on the National Register of Historic Places, Grand Gulf Military Park was officially opened in May 1962 as a Mississippi State Park to preserve the memory of both the town and the battle that occurred there. The park spans 450 acres and includes Fort Coburn and Fort Wade, the Grand Gulf Cemetery, a museum, a carriage house, campgrounds, picnic facilities, hiking trails, a memorial chapel from Rodney, an observation tower, and several restored buildings dating back to Grand Gulf's heyday. There's also earthworks built and utilized during the Civil War, including a blown up ammunition magazine. I'll put a link down below as I covered the Grand Gulf Military Park in more detail in its own video.
Next up, we headed to Alcorn State, where there's an old road that leads to Rodney, Mississippi. Alcorn State is a beautiful campus. We actually found the road and drove down it a bit, but it's a one-laner and it's all dirt and mud, so we decided to turn around and find a better way.
The final stop on this half-day trip from Natchez was the ghost town of Rodney, Mississippi. About 20 miles from Port Gibson, the ghost town of Rodney, which was incorporated in 1828, once had more than 500 residents, 2 newspapers, and numerous stores, hotels, and banks. And there was even talk of making Rodney the state capital after Mississippi achieved statehood in 1817 because it was an important shipping point along the river. But the river eventually contributed to the town's demise because it flooded so often that residents began moving away. Rodney also suffered from 2 yellow fever epidemics in 1843 and 1847, losing many of its residents to the disease. Today, visitors can explore the remnants of this eerie town, including 2 churches, a 2-story Masonic hall, a grocery store, and a cemetery. Just a really cool trip to an old town that used to be a big town that's no longer much of a town at all. This half-day trip to Port Gibson, the Grand Gulf Military Park, and Rodney, the ghost city, was a great bit of fun. Just a nice little excursion while you're staying the long weekend over in Natchez. Thanks for watching, and as always, we will see you on the next video.